Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on day 19 of the war. My name is Eylon Levy. I'm a spokesperson here for the Prime Minister's office. We'll start with a brief update before taking a few of your questions. A total of 7,840 Hamas rockets have been indiscriminately fired against Israel since October 7th. The death toll in Israel now stands at 1,400 Israelis at least, with more than 5,312 who have been injured. Israel's efforts to dismantle Hamas's infrastructure in the Gaza Strip continue apace. Overnight, the IDF successfully eliminated a top Hamas general, Taisir Mubashir, commander of the Hamas North Khan Yunis battalion. Mubashir was responsible for numerous attacks against Israeli civilians. In other operations, the IDF struck several Hamas terrorist infrastructure and operational sites. Yesterday, the Israeli naval forces thwarted an attempted infiltration by a Hamas terror cell near the Zikim coast, and the terrorists involved were neutralized. Now to our 220 hostages still being held cruelly by Hamas. I want to tell you about one of the hostages, Avigail Idan. Avigail is 3 years old. This little angel is a hostage of Hamas, the same Hamas that made her an orphan. She is one of 30 children Hamas is holding hostage. On the morning of October 7th, Hamas death squads raided Kfar Aza. It was a campaign of systematic extermination. They brutally murdered her parents, Ro'i and Smadar Idan. Ro'i was a journalist, a photographer. He loved taking pictures of flowers, and he hated war. On the morning of October 7th, he captured the death squads on their way to murder him and his family. The Hamas death squads broke into the Idan family home. They murdered Smadar, the mother. For 14 hours of sheer terror, her children Michael, aged 9, and Amalia, aged 6, hid alone in a closet next to the dead body of their mother. They hid, as their grandfather said at their parents' funeral, like Jewish children hid during the Holocaust. Ro'i held his darling girl Avigail in his arms. Hamas brutally murdered him. The savages who burned, beheaded, tortured, and raped their way through their neighbors' houses and murdered her parents took Avigail hostage. Her abduction is a crime against humanity. We demand the international community apply all possible pressure on Hamas and its supporters to release the 220 hostages immediately and unconditionally. Finally, I would like to address the comments made by the UN Secretary General yesterday about Hamas's massacre, as if they did not happen in a vacuum. It is inexcusable to make excuses for Hamas's act of genocide. Nobody demanded a humanitarian ceasefire with Boko Haram after it abducted 270 girls. Nobody urged the international coalition fighting ISIS to stop after just 2 weeks. And nobody pretended there were two sides when Al-Qaeda took down the Twin Towers. The Israeli people were the victims of an unprovoked act of aggression by a non-state actor sworn to its annihilation. Israel is upholding the international rules-based order in exercising our right and obligation of self-defense, and we demand that the United Nations uphold its own foundational principles underpinning international peace and security. But Antonio Guterres is right. The October 7th massacre did not happen in a vacuum. The October 7th massacre happened in the context of Hamas's open campaign to eliminate the state of Israel, annihilate its people, and turn the country into an Islamic caliphate. It happened in the context of Hamas using brutal violence over many years to scuttle any hope of peace. It happened in the context of the entire Palestinian nationalist movement refusing to disavow terrorism and accept the sovereign legitimacy of the State of Israel. And only yesterday we saw the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister on the BBC refuse 3 times to condemn the massacre of October 7th when asked. The October 7th massacre happened after years in which Hamas has exploited the Gaza Strip and international aid to build the death machine that murdered 1,400 of our friends and family. After years in which it siphoned the water and electricity Israel provided to the people of Gaza for free by the way. Years in which it used millions of dollars in international aid to build rockets. Years in which it diverted concrete that was meant for house building to the tunnels where it is now holding our hostages. Years in which Hamas hogged fuel from Israel that was meant to go to hospital generators, funneling it into its war machine instead, including the 24,000 litres of fuel that it stole from the United Nations just last week. Years in which the international community turned a blind eye to this death machine that Hamas was building at the expense of Gazan civilians. Years in which Hamas's leadership had threatened to rip hearts out of the Jews' bodies, and they would do it again. The October 7th massacre comes after decades of United Nations complicity with the Palestinians' genocidal demands of from the river to the sea. It comes after decades of the United Nations telling over half of the Palestinians in Gaza that Gaza is not their home, that they are refugees, using a totally different definition of refugee from every other refugee in the world and nurturing their delusional dreams of replacing Israel. It comes after decades of indoctrination of Palestinian children by UNRWA, a UN agency, with teaching materials that glorify terrorism and encourage martyrdom. It comes after decades of the United Nations allowing its institutions to be hijacked by the Palestinian nationalist cause in its unceasing campaign to erase a sovereign UN member state. The Secretary General is correct that Palestinian grievances cannot justify what he correctly called the appalling attacks by Hamas. Nothing can justify the appalling atrocities of October 7th, and that is why we will continue defending ourselves and our people until victory. I'll now take some questions. If we have anyone would like to ask a question, please raise a hand in the chat or submit questions through the chat. Thank you.
I'll put you on mute, but let's go to Sophia. There are a couple in the chat, but let's go to live first. Okay, so I'm going to unmute you now.
We have a question from Sophia, please. Sophia, if you're asking a question, I can't hear you. Okay, Sophia, if you could please type in the question. We seem to be having technical trouble. We have a question whether Israel is pursuing any actions relating to its official relationship with the United Nations, whether any other nations have expressed an interest in doing so. Israel's position remains clear. Israel is a sovereign member of the United Nations. In fighting Hamas in our campaign to destroy the terror organization that perpetrated the October 7th massacre, we are upholding the basic principles of the international rules-based order, upholding the basic principle that a state that comes under an unprovoked act of aggression, an act of genocide, has a right and an obligation to defend itself, and we're demanding that the United Nations stand up for the own foundational principles for which this organization was established and live up to those lofty principles. Questions about the timing of the Israeli ground operation. Israel is going to move ahead with the next stage in our campaign to destroy Hamas in response to the October 7th massacre as our operational needs require. Clearly, there are many factors that are being taken into account, but Israel's resolve remains clear. Hamas started this war with the massacre of October 7th, and Israel is going to end this war, and Israel will end this war with the total defeat of Hamas. As President Biden said, urging Israel not to act out of anger, Israel is not shooting from the hip. We will use our force judiciously at a time of our choosing in accordance with our operational needs. We take a question from David Isaac at the JNS, please. Okay, we seem to be having some technical difficulties, so if you could please type in the question, because if you're asking, I'm not hearing you. We'll just wait another minute if anyone wants to type questions. I see we have a question from David Isaac at the JNS. A question whether Israel was surprised by Guterres' comments. Unfortunately, the United Nations systematic and institutional bias against Israel is a clear matter of record. Now, the two previous UN Secretary Generals, Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon, went on the record saying that this is a problem, the institutional and systematic bias against the State of Israel that must be addressed, and it is regrettable that the current UN Secretary General has not only staked the same position about the UN's systematic bias, but appears to have embraced it too. We have a few more minutes if anyone would like to submit another question. No, in which case, anyone wishing to submit a question, of course, you know the email address to which you can refer those questions. Everyone, please keep safe, and we'll see you the same time tomorrow. Thank you very much.